Coming up on the Rommel Show. This week's episode commemorates both the worst day of my life and what ended up being the catalyst for the life I live today. In this episode, we're talking about divorce, marriage, a near divorce, and more. So, whether you're in a marriage, about to be in one, want to get out of one, this episode is for you. Hey, Glenn, let's strike up the band. Yes, thank you, Glenn, and thank you for tuning in to the Rommel Anakin Show. If you are watching on YouTube, good to see you. And if you're listening on your favorite podcast platform, I'm so glad that you decided to tune in today. This is the Rommel Anakin Show. I'm Rommel Anakin. I am so glad that you are here. So last week, I had kind of a bizarre, yet beautiful, yet special, yet bizarre, yet disassociate, like all of the things experience. So let me set the table for you. I just completed a speaking engagement in Denver, Colorado, where I was in the back of an Uber, going from the hotel right to the airport. And I was in the back of this, I think it was a Tesla. So in the back of a Tesla Model 3, and I'm surfing on the phone. And then I see the date on my phone, and boom, instantly I realized that that date was the exact date when I found out that my first marriage was over, when my ex-wife told me that she wanted a divorce. And then when I ran the math even more, I remember thinking, wait a minute, it's been 20 years. Like this happened in 2004, right? It's now 2024. And so as I'm riding in the back of this Tesla Model 3, I'm having this existential moment of my brain just went like, what just happened? Because all at once, I had the memories of what had happened 20 years ago, having that conversation with my ex-wife when I discovered that my marriage is over. The shock of that. I can still remember feeling like my body, like what my body felt. If you've ever had that conversation with someone, if you've ever experienced a breakup, whatever side of the breakup you're on, I bet you can relate. And I remember, in that moment feeling like I couldn't breathe. It was like, it was just the laboring to do that. I remember literally feeling like my life was flashing in front of my eyes and like I was in a movie that I was watching, but I wasn't actually in it. Like it was that just really, really weird. So as I'm in the back of this Uber going to the airport, I both could remember exactly everything that I felt, all of the stuff, and it all came flooding back. And at the same time, that memory felt so far away that it didn't feel like that was even a part of my story. Like I knew it here in my head, but there was also a disconnect somewhere. So it was this really, really weird experience. But I think my brain was just coming to terms with that. It's been 20 years, 20 years since going through that divorce and all of the things and all of the changes that happened afterwards, right? And so as I was in the back of the car, I did a post on Instagram, and come follow me on Instagram, by the way, if you don't, at Rommel Anakin, and you can see that post. And I post a picture of me and Casey now, along with some of my thoughts regarding that day. And what's so interesting is uh, that literally was probably one of the worst days of my life. And obviously, as you can tell, I still remember that day. I remember the date. I remember those things. And even though it's been 20 years now, it can still, right, there's still a pull towards remembering that day because it was such a watershed moment in my life. And um, so in thinking and in reflecting about this, I was just kind of blown away, both that 20 years had passed and in the amount of change that my life has gone through in the last 20 years. And what's interesting is even though that was one of the worst days of my life in so many ways. That day also ended up being the catalyst for the life that I live today. Because here's what happened. I remember a few weeks after all of this happened, and I was speaking to my ex-wife, and it was kind of the first time that I had a chance to ask her kind of like what happened. And this is when the dust was just starting to settle for me internally. That I remember going like, what happened? Like like legitimately what happened? I am confused. Like what the blank happened, right? Was what I was thinking. And she proceeded to tell me, and I give her a lot of credit. She was both incredibly honest, incredibly blunt, and she was kind, even even with all the emotions that she was feeling about it. Okay. And that was one of those incredibly eye-opening moments for me. I had no idea that she felt that way. I had no idea the things like I'm just even as I'm recounting the story for you now, I can still picture it, and I'm seeing this, and I remember just that reality coming on to my shoulders and settling into me and realizing that I had a ginormous part to play in the breakup of the marriage. Now, I will say this. I don't take 100% blame for it. I don't take 100% responsibility, but I do take my 50% responsibility for what happened in that. That was probably one of the biggest things that I walked away with that. However, it was important for me to take the ownership of what I did to contribute to the breakup of what I thought was a good relationship. And that moment when she revealed to me the things that she was feeling and the reasons why, and some very specific scenarios and situations that had happened where I just didn't treat her heart well. I didn't communicate well. I didn't connect well. My actions did not show my true feelings, if that makes sense. So the things that I did that I thought were helping, that showed that I loved her and that I cared about her, actually communicated to her the exact opposite. And I had no idea that those things that I was doing and saying were not the right things to say, were not the good things to say, were actually causing damage. And so, as hard as that moment was to just have pretty much let her have, where she let me have it with the brutally honest truth, it was one of the best things that could have ever happened in my life because what that made me aware of is that I have an impact on people. And I always believed that that impact was good and positive. And if it wasn't good and positive, I believed that the problem was the other person. I didn't believe that the problem was me. I mean, because come on, it couldn't be me, right? It's got to be the other person. And sitting there and seeing that this person who I'd spent my life with, who we were married to, and we had this, what I thought was a really, really good relationship, seeing this person say, listen, I've been so hurt that I don't want to be in this relationship anymore, was eye opening, was eye opening for me. And here's what happened for me that started me on a journey. That started me on the journey. And the first journey was just, I just wanted her back. And so if you've ever been on that side of the breakup where you've been the one that's been broken up with, I bet you can relate. And so I went in, I'm going to save my marriage mode, and here's how I'm going to save it. And so, guys, I read every relationship book, marriage book. If there's a CD course, yep, CD, this is that era. I bought it. If there was a website I could research, I researched it. Like literally, I dove in and I became a relationship expert. In a way, like, you know what I mean? Like I wanted to become a relationship expert. It's probably a better way to put it. Because what I wanted was what I realized is that obviously the status quo wasn't good. And so if we were to find our way back together, I knew that I needed to change and that I knew that moving forward, the relationship would have to be different than it was. Like the goal wasn't just to get back together and then be completely miserable and then get divorced, but just push that down. My goal was to learn what I could about marriage, intimacy, connection, communication, apply what I learned so that when we found our way back together, and I was absolutely convinced we would, then it would be different. Then it would be different. And there was so much good with that, guys. I learned so much stuff. In fact, I remember picking up Men Over Mars, Women from Venus. And literally by the second paragraph, I felt both the conviction of, oh crap, you're not supposed to do that. And so I was very convicted. Like it was like I really felt like God made so many things aware to me, like, hey, so you know when you did that? Yeah, that was bad. Hey, remember when you said it that way? Yeah, that was kind of bad too. Hey, remember when you said that to her? Yep, that nope, not good. Not good. Right. Bad, 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 bad. Right. And I will say in reading it, there were also things that I noticed that she would do to me or she would say to me that just rubbed me the wrong way. And then I got a better understanding of why it rubbed me the wrong way and that she wasn't intentionally trying to do that. It was just our natural differences, right? So I dove in, became, I mean, I consumed as much content as I could about relationships, communication, marriage, again, because what I wanted was for us to come back together and for it to be different and better, right? And so, how did I recover to have a successful marriage today, right? Because, after the divorce and all this stuff, and then of course, then Casey and I meet and we've been married for over 18 years now, right? And so the first thing that I discovered was this is I really had to take inventory. And if you've ever heard of the 12 steps, whether it's from like AA or Al-Anon or any of the 12 step type programs, one of the steps is to make a searching and fearless moral inventory of yourself. And that's what I did. I had to take inventory. The divorce forced me to look inward in a way that I had never done before. And in looking inward, I didn't like a lot of what I found. I didn't like a lot of what I found. And I don't mean that in a self judgmental way or in a way that was designed for like fear, guilt, and shame or to bury me. Like literally, it was just like, oh, I don't like that about me. Apparently, she didn't like that about me either. Um, but it was so difficult to do that, but it was so good. It was so good. And so in the aftermath of the divorce, I took an inventory, and instead of me focusing my anger at her for leaving me and my anger at her for all the things that she should have done or shouldn't have done, what I was able to do was just reflect inward, and for me, make a searching and fearless moral inventory of my role and what I did to contribute to the relationship ending. And again, it was so tough, but it was so good. It was so good and so eye-opening. And then the second thing that I was able to do is after taking inventory was taking responsibility. Okay, it was taking responsibility. And so again, there's that moment of it's really hard not to take responsibility in a way when the person who you thought was the most important in your life says, I don't think I can be with you anymore. I don't think I can be with you anymore. And you're going to go one of two ways. You are either going to go, well, it is all your fault and it was not me, and boom, and it's all about the other person, or you can take responsibility. It's very easy, isn't it, for us to put all of the blame. Yeah, if your relationship isn't what you want it to be, it's very easy to say it's all your spouse's fault. And if we're honest, there are probably many, many, many things, right? Or some things, or a couple of things where your spouse is, I'm going to say, at fault. And if you're listening to this, I'm putting at fault in quotes, the air quotes. All right. It's easy to point fingers. It's easy to blame. It's harder to take responsibility. But here's the powerful thing about it is whenever you're able to take responsibility for your role, whether it's 5%, whether it's 30%, whether it's 49.9999%, here's why this is so powerful. Because when you're able to take responsibility for it and you own it, you are then able to make positive changes. Because if it is never your fault, that means that nothing can ever get better unless your spouse changes, which is where people get stuck. But if you start to tell yourself, you know what? I'm going to take responsibility for my stuff. I'm going to take my 50% and I'm going to figure out what it is that I can do with that. And when you take that responsibility, what ends up happening is you are empowered to start to ignite change in your relationship. And here's why that's important. Because the third thing that I did was this is I focused on what I could change. In the aftermath of the divorce, what I tried to do a lot of is I focused on trying to get her to change her mind. And I did all the things you already know don't work, like pleading, arguing, debating, texting, emailing, right? All of that stuff saying, no, change your mind, change your mind, change your mind, change your mind. I can tell you right now, that did not work. Okay. That obviously we're not married today. That didn't work. And so there was a shift that happened in my mind probably about a month in, where I said, listen, you can't change your Rommel, but here's what you can change. Focus on you. So I slowly started to focus more on me, started to focus more on what I could do, focus more on how I could grow, focus more on what I could do. And that felt really good. I got to tell you, that felt really good. Like that felt empowering. Like even right now, as I'm sharing this with you, I can remember once I was in a grocery store. It was a Vaughn's grocery store for those of you who have Vaughn's, and I was doing my shopping. And I remember I was starting to go in the spiral loop of blaming and pointing fingers. And in my mind, as I was in the aisle and shopping for my stuff, I remember like stopping myself, going like, nope, 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 nope. Just focus on you, Rommel. Focus on you. Focus on you. Focus on what you can do. And, in the middle of aisle 9 or something in the soda aisle, I remember going, yeah, I'm just going to focus on me. And I remember shifting that focus again and taking that power away from that I'd placed on my ex, right? Going, hey, on her to change, on her to do this, and her to make me happy. And said, no, 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 no. I'm going to focus on me and focus on what I can change. And that was so good. And that is what started the process for me, or what started and then sustained the process for me to grow as a person and to get the healing that I needed to be able to move forward in the way that I needed to move forward. And then the last thing I did in this round that I want to share with you is I surrendered the rest to God. There was so much that I couldn't do. So all I could do is focus on what I could focus on. I did the growing that I could. I did the changing that I could. I did all of this, the self-reflection and the praying and the maturing and all of that. And everything else was just this process of surrendering to God. Now, I'd love to tell you that it was as easy as I just outlined for you. It wasn't. It wasn't. It was this is a process that played out over months and months and months and months and months and months and months. But I remember the day, I will tell you this. Remember the day I was driving to work and I was on the freeway here in Southern California. And halfway on my commute, I remember thinking in my mind, well, wait a minute. My first thought of the day wasn't how miserable I was because I was going through this divorce. And there was this moment of just freedom and peace when I realized that I was moving forward. And the reason I was able to move forward, even though that marriage was never restored, was because I was able to take inventory of myself, take responsibility. And then I just had a laser beam focus on the things that I could change. And on the things that I couldn't change, I surrendered those things to God. And here's a really cool thing. He had me in the palm of his hand, and he guided me and he led me on a really cool journey. And that journey led me to meeting Casey and for us getting married and creating our family and having a marriage that lasted over 18 years. Now, if you know our story, you also know that there was a lot of that story that was really tough and difficult. And I'll share more about that in the future. If you have gone through a divorce and you're still feeling discouraged or disappointed of it, I want you to understand, and I do want you to believe that that you can absolutely find love again. Absolutely. And I'm living proof of that. And even if your walk away from that is you did every single thing wrong, you can absolutely, you can absolutely find love again. And what I would highly encourage you to do is the steps that we talked about earlier in the episode, right? Because here's what's an interesting thing is the surveys or the studies have shown that second marriages fail at a higher rate than first marriages, and third marriages fail at an even higher rate than first and second marriages. And so what that tells us is this: we are not learning our lessons from our divorce. In fact, here's what I believe. This is an anecdotal thing. This is just in my observation of relationships for the last 20 years is usually when someone gets divorced, right? Or in a lot of ways, when it's not for the big reasons that you imagine, that it's, I'm just not sure if we're in love anymore. We've just drifted apart, where, those things. There's usually some component of everything would be better if only she changed. Everything would be better if only he changed, right? So there's this feeling that when the dissatisfaction, discouragement, just the resentment, you know what I'm talking about, sets in your relationship, the belief behind that is usually the problem is her. The problem is him. I'm not the problem. Therefore, if I want to change the condition of my marriage, what I need to do is change who I am married to. Therefore, I'm going to leave this person and solve the problem. Okay? And but then what ends up happening? People go into second marriages and they find themselves right back smack dab in the middle of the same stuff that they were in their first marriage. But because they've already gone through the process of divorce, they know they're going to be okay. They know that they're going to be able to make it through. It makes it easier for them to make that decision. The second time, it definitely makes it easier for them to make the decision the third time. I believe the common denominator always seems to come down to, though, when people make that decision collectively, right? Culturally or whatever, it's the mindset is it's not me, it's her. It's not me, it's him. Therefore, I married the wrong person. Therefore, that person's never going to change. Therefore, I got to get out because I deserve to have a marriage that I love, which we all should have marriages that we love. But I think what's happening is a lot of people end up they come to the wrong conclusions about why the marriage ended, and they also come to the wrong conclusions about what they could have done to restore it, to refresh it, to re-energize it, to bring the spark back. And so, um, what I'm here to tell you is if you're divorced and you'd love to be married again, do the work. Do the work. And you know what I'm talking about. Go and do the work. Do the work. Okay, use this time. If you're not currently in a relationship, take advantage of this time to invest in you, to work on you, to grow you, so that when you meet that special someone, your heart is more healed, your emotions are more healed, you're more ready and more prepared to be in the relationship that you need to. And you can do that, by the way, without feeling shame or guilt or fear about what happened in the past. What happened in the past is in the past. Okay. There's no need to feel shame or guilt or fear about the past, but you do want to learn from it so that you can move forward with confidence and with conviction so that you can experience the love and the life that you've always wanted. And then for those of you who are listening and maybe your marriage is on thin ice or it's on rocky ground right now. Maybe you're feeling like, Rommel, you don't understand. Even having a conversation with my spouse feels like walking all over broken glass. If you've been thinking more about divorce, if it's sounded like it's more of an appealing option for you, I just want you to know, I just want you to know that you can find your way back together. with your spouse. You can find a way to have a marriage that you love again. In studying relationships for 20 years, it's so interesting to see that the gap and the chasm that we think is so large actually isn't as large as we think it is if we do the right things, if we focus on the right things and we do the right things, if we're able to set aside our preferences and our expectations and just really go in focused on what do I need to do? What do I need to grow? What are the things I can do something different? Right? When we're able to approach that a little bit differently, just a little bit of focus, just a little bit of change, just changing something just a little bit may have tremendous effects on your relationship. So if you're listening to this and you're thinking, I don't know, Rommel, I'm not sure if I want to stay in this relationship, completely understand. If you know my story with me and Casey, about, you know, 10 years ago or so, we were almost on that verge. So I totally get it. Totally understand. I'm just here to tell you, I'm just here to tell you that the gap between you and your spouse may not be as wide as you think it is. Now, it is going to require some work. It's going to require some growth. It's going to require you to make some decisions that, let's just be honest, you're not going to want to make, but it's worth it. It may very well be worth it. There's so many times that I look at Casey now and she'll look at me and we just tell each other, thank you. Thanks for doing the work. Thank you for pressing through those really tough times when we were on the verge of ending our marriage. And it was hard. Man, it was hard, but it was also really, really worth it. And looking back on the 20 years of my life, if I knowing where the path was going to take me, I go through that journey again. My wife is in the other room and she's preparing for a powerful meeting tonight with a group of people that she leads. And I love knowing that she's there. Our daughter's in the living room doing some homework, probably. Our dog's probably sleeping on a couch somewhere. Yeah, I go through this journey again. I go through it again, knowing where it ended up. However, if I could help someone avoid the really tough parts of the journey, that would be a win too. Well, guys, thank you so much for listening to this episode of the podcast and really listening to kind of my stream of consciousness stuff about the 20-year anniversary of my divorce. And before we end this episode, I'd love to say a blessing over you. If you share my faith, amen and amen. And if you don't share my faith, I just hope that you're able to receive this today as a blessing. So, my friends, may the Lord bless you and protect you. May the Lord smile on you and be gracious to you. May the Lord show you his favor and give you his peace. This is the Rommel Anakin Show, and we'll see you next time.